Gordon Strong joins me this week to discuss brewing the perfect Belgian Dark Strong Ale. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 208. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 208, and it's early February 2020. Gordon Strong joins me this week to discuss brewing Belgian Dark Strong Ales. Thank you to this week's sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Every issue of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine is packed with articles for homebrewers and beer lovers. They're currently offering 20% off their all-access subscription pass with access to videos, brewing courses, exclusive articles, and the Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Go to beerandbrewing.com/BeerSmith to get your all-access pass today. Again, that's beerandbrewing.com/BeerSmith. And also the Brew Easy. Brew big and small spaces with the best all-grain ultra-compact system available. The Brew Easy's revolutionary setup includes batch sparge efficiency, blue-in-a-bag simplicity, and the wort clarification of a rim system. It's easy to set up, easy to operate, and easy on the eyes. Add the optional Brew Commander controller for precise temperature control and mash automation. With the Brew Easy, you'll discover definitive proof that size isn't everything. Electric and propane models are available. It's also the system that I brew on. Visit blickmanengineering.com for more information. Again, that's blickmanengineering.com. And finally, I urge you to give BeerSmith 3 brewing software a try. BeerSmith 3 adds mead, wine, and cider recipe support to the BeerSmith platform, along with new integrated water profile and mash pH tools. Dozens of new features include cloud folders, updated databases, support for fruit, juice, and honey, as well as new Whirlpool hop options. Download your free 21-day trial today from beersmith.com and give it a try. And now let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, I welcome back Gordon Strong. Gordon is the president and highest level beer judge in the Beer Judge Certification Program, as well as author of the books Modern Homebrew Recipes and Brewing Better Beer. Gordon, it's great to have you back, man. How you doing?
Hey, good to see you again, Brad. So
what have you been up to, Gordon? Have you been traveling the world, globe-trotting, what?
Kind of, but usually there's a little bit of break around the end of the year, so just sort of charge your batteries up a little bit and take some family time and hop back into it. I'm heading off to Brazil in a month, so.
Are you really? You're heading off to Brazil too?
Yeah, I love it in Brazil.
I haven't been there in a while, but I did enjoy the trip that I took a little while ago. How's I think you're going to the BYO event as well, right? Coming up in March.
Yeah, I'll go to Brazil before then, but at the end of the March, BYO's doing their boot camp thing again.
And what are you teaching?
I'm teaching advanced all grain brewing, so get to haul out one of those shiny Blickman systems. And
are you teaming up with Blickman again?
Well, he lets me borrow his gear, but he's usually off teaching something else. I think he's doing something with Palmer, but he just helps set up the equipment and make sure it's all good to go. That way, I don't have to bring mine.
Awesome. Well, today you wanted to discuss Belgian Dark Strong Ale, or strong dark ales, right?
Dark Strong.
Strong dark.
Belgian Dark Strong Ale. Yeah,
okay.
Just check the guidelines.
Yeah. It's part of category 26, I think, which includes now, you mentioned single, double, and triple, right?
Yep. They're the kind of Trappist type beers. Trappist or
well, I mean, what do some of these beers have in common? Because they're all kind of grouped together here.
Yeah. We tried to group together the beers that were the ones that had been derived from some of the Trappist breweries, but other people make them too. So there are different gravities and they're different colors. But they tend to be fairly well attenuated, pretty well carbonated. They're the commercial examples are always bottle conditioned. And they tend to have a similar kind of yeast profile. They're always something that's like fruity and spicy.
But they are kind of distinct in terms of color and flavor, right?
From each other, yeah.
Yeah.
But like I said, there's pale ones and dark ones in that style family. But the different examples are different colors. Yeah.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about the history of Belgian Dark Strong?
Well, it's when you talk to anybody about Belgium, the first thing they'll tell you is Belgium doesn't have beer styles, and that's kind of true.
What is that?
But
Why is that?
Well, they're very they're a creative and sort of idiosyncratic group, and they like to think everybody that makes a beer is unique. Like, well, sure, but you can take a step back and look at a group of beers and see they share similar characteristics. So if after the fact you're trying to categorize them, yeah, you can totally do that. But the Belgians didn't set out necessarily to brew a beer in this style, because the styles came after. The styles are just the categorization of what they actually did.
Right. So what's some of the history behind particularly the Dark Strong Ale? Is it a traditional beer? Was it brewed a long time ago?
Not really. Some of the Trappist monasteries were around for several hundred years, on and off. They've had a number of wars that go through Belgium, and that's impacted a number of things. You talk about the Germans that you think of, but the French went through there, and the early 1800s, and pretty much had outlawed monasteries. So some of those religious orders had to go into hiding, but the fact that these monasteries have been going on for a long time doesn't mean like these beer styles have. A lot of the modern styles are really post World War One, and the stronger ones that are more like the Belgian Dark Strongs tend to be post World War II.
Yeah, I think Stan mentioned that many of the modern Abbey ales are fairly recent inventions. I had him on, I can't remember, a couple episodes back.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking like 100 years ago is like when, they first started making doubles and triples and things like that. And I think some of the Dark Strongs, these beers started out as special beers, and some of them were Christmas beer, like the Chimay was a Christmas beer originally. And I think they first started to emerge right before World War II, but most examples are from after World War II.
So is a Belgian Dark Strong considered a Trappist ale if it's brewed at one of the Trappist monasteries?
Yeah. The Trappists are very sort of fussy about
trademark, or something.
Yeah, how you use the word Trappist. I mean, they don't like the way we use it, so we're probably going to change it to monastic or something like that, just so they leave me alone. But technically, any beer made by a Trappist monastery is a Trappist beer. So they could make an imperial stout, and that's a Trappist beer.
Right. It's more of a trademark kind of thing, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's more of a statement of the origin of the beer, and we're using it in sort of a different way to talk about groupings of beers with similar perceptual characteristics.
Well, for this particular beer style, can you talk to us a little bit about what the finished beer tastes and look like? How do you describe that beer?
Yeah, so the name is the clue. It's Belgian, it's dark, it's strong, and it's an ale. So in this case, dark basically means something that's not pale, because some examples are kind of deep amber, into the copper to brown, but they're never going to be black. And they're strong. They tend to be like 8% and up. And while they do come from Belgium, there are breweries in some other countries that make these, but they're certainly inspired by the beers of Belgium, like most are. And it is an ale, of course. So it's going to be using one of these interesting Belgian yeast strains.
So what are some of the key flavors we might pick up if we sampled one?
Well, so I try to differentiate the flavors that come from the different ingredients. It's going to be a malty beer, so a lot of the flavors are derived from the malts and the sugars that are used, and there's a range of them. We can talk about that. There really isn't a lot of late hops. There's maybe just a light note of it, because you find in a lot of these Belgian beers that have a strong yeast character, they tend not to like to stomp on that by hopping it up too much. So the yeast can be fruity and, like I said, spicy, like peppery. The kind of yeast are the phenolic off flavor positive strains, or POF plus yeasts, that tend to throw off the sort of clove and pepper and those kind of things.
So I mean, you get some complexity and depth to the beer, right?
Oh, definitely. And then there's the depth and complexity you get just because it's a big beer. You have, an 8 to 12% beer. It's like a barley wine in strength. It's going to have, when you use that amount of malt, it's going to have a lot of flavor. But the Belgians actually, especially the Trappist type beers, they tend to be really well attenuated. They tend to not be, the equivalent of a Belgian barley wine. They tend to have a little bit of a leaner body about them.
I assume some of that's from the sugar, right? Because the sugar's so fermentable, it probably thins the body out.
It does. And then, the way they mash, these things are usually step mashed, kind of like German beers. Mm-hmm. So, that gives it sort of a malty body and a dry finish. The times I've been to Belgium and talked to Belgians about what they think about their beer and the attributes of the beer, they talk about the attenuation, but they don't use attenuation. They use digestibility.
So what does that? What does that mean? What is digestibility? I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah, from what I take is that it means it's easier to drink. It's not going to feel heavy in the stomach, because it's not. The final gravity is going to be on the lower side. Mm-hmm. So if it was really kind of heavy and syrupy, they couldn't have a big glass of it. And, they do have big glasses of it.
That's big glass of their 12% beer.
Yeah. The big chalices that they'll have, and every brewery has their own, and, they're fairly unique. I mean, I've got an example here. This is, you can see the logo. This is
nice.
This is the
West.
The logo glassware from West Vleteren.
Yeah, I see it. Nice.
So,
on the video, of course, if you have time to watch the video.
What's that?
Oh, I said I was just telling people it's on the video if they have time to watch the video. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think I might be trying one while we're chatting.
That sounds lovely. Yeah. You mentioned you had a rough day, I think.
Yeah, and I could have show you that if you want to see.
It's kind of white out there, but so which one is it? I can't quite make it out.
West Vleteren 12.
Nice.
If you can kind of see the cap has kind of a yellowish color.
Yeah, I do see. There's a yellow cap on it.
Yellow cap, blue cap, green cap. But if you notice this, there's like no label on it. You can see kind of the shape of the bottle, and it says the brewery here.
Well, you ought to pop that open and drink it, I think.
Yeah. You talk a little bit while I check this one out.
Well, I was the next thing I want to ask is, can provide us some basic stats for the style. The original gravity, bitterness. You already talked about it's a fairly high alcohol beer, 8 to 12%. But where does the color fall out, the bitterness level, and so on?
So this is one of the paler versions, and you can kind of see that
still pretty opaque, yeah.
Yeah, I can see through it with the light from the monitor. It's kind of like it's a sort of a deep copper, kind of like a Bock would be, or an alt beer, perhaps. But other versions, other producers, they'll have ones that are brown and tend to be opaque. But let me check the style guidelines here.
Original gravity,
1075 to 1110.
That's a big beer.
It's a big beer, but the final gravity goes as low as 1010.
Wow.
Maybe up to 1024 in some of the Abbey versions. They tend not to be quite as well attenuated as some of the Trappist beers. Mm-hmm. And the IBUs are 20 to 35.
I assume that's just to balance out all the malt, right?
Yeah, actually, the one that I got here, the Westvleteren, is one of the more bitter ones, and it doesn't really come across as a bitter beer. The balance should be malty, but I think the mistake that a lot of American brewers make with the style, and they make this, they have this problem with triples as well, is that they start too high and they finish too high. So they wind up with too much residual sugar. Mm-hmm. Even if the beer has sort of a high percentage of attenuation, if you look at the absolute amount of final gravity, that'll tell you kind of how much sweetness is there. So a lot of these Belgian beers tend to be dry, and if you cellar them for a while, some of the malt proteins kind of fall out and they get drier over time.
Now, is this a beer you would age for a long time? I mean, it's such a big beer, you probably don't want to drink it too young, I would think.
No. If you drink it too young, it can you can get a lot of the hot alcohol flavors and
makes sense.
Yeah, you want to like those smooth out. I'm just checking the cap on here because they're dated. So this was probably from 2012 because this particular brewery labels their beers, their best by date on the cap is like 5 years from when it was brewed. So it's like May 22nd.
So that one's over its expiration date. It still tastes good?
2017. I don't know.
He's sampling in real time here.
Mm-hmm.
You should know you're one of the top. You're the top beer judge in the world, right?
Yeah,
highest level, anyways. What do you think?
Yeah,
good.
Right. Yeah, that's a good bottle.
Oh,
this beer is really fussy.
Interesting.
It's a crapshoot when you open it's hard to find, and when you do get one, a lot of times it has gone off. So that's really kind of disappointing. I mean, for an every not everyday beer, but a better choice for me would be something like the St. Bernardus 12. You can find that in a lot of places, and that's usually really solid.
So what are some of the samples, or what are some of the examples you might be able to find here in the U.S.?
I really like the Rochefort 10.
Mm-hmm.
That one's really good. You can find the Chimay Blue,
Mm-hmm.
um, which tends to be pretty dry and is not quite as big as some of these other ones. You really can't find the Westfleter, and they don't import it. You have to sort of go to Belgium and stand in line some days and be lucky. Yeah, it's absurd.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
how about you want to get down to brewing a dark strong? Let's talk about that,
uh,
maybe.
well, I could drink some more of it.
You drink some more of it. That's fine. Well, you can do that while we're talking. Yeah. You
Yeah,
said
I
it's
wanted
pretty
to say
good.
something about the flavor profile.
Yeah,
Is
please
that,
go ahead.
the yeast can be very fruity, and it's often like dried fruit or dark fruit. In this one, I'm tasting like plums and dried cherries, a little bit of raisin. Other versions can, be even darker. They can get into like figs and prunes and things like that. They're delicious.
And I assume that's a combination of probably the grains used and the yeast as well, right?
Yeah, and the sugars can give that flavor too.
Oh yeah, the sugars have a lot of melanoidin in them, I think, right?
Yeah,
Typically.
the caramelization of the sugars to give the color develops flavors, and then the yeast transform them, and then there's age effects on top of that. So the darker beers, because they have melanoidins in them, they're kind of a natural antioxidant. So they tend to allow these beers to age well. So I'd love one of these with some age. I had.
Yeah, I know a lot of darker beers. If you age them well, they get more like sherry-like flavors instead of that, lipstick cardboard kind of flavor, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right, right, and it's like opening a well-aged bottle of like French Bordeaux, versus drinking Beaujolais Nouveau or something that something really fresh and fruity.
Yeah.
You get something that just has such layers of flavors. It's there really gets to be an elegant beer.
Yeah, the
Uh,
one you got there is what, 10, 7 years old, I think, right? Right. Roughly
uh,
2013. Yeah.
yeah,
Almost 7.
2012,
It's been aged well.
May 2012. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Eight,
and
almost 8
it
years.
yeah, it's held up nicely. I can
Yeah.
see like the head settled kind of fast, so some of the proteins are starting to fall out, and the body's a little thinner than it often is. But the
Yeah.
flavor profile is really solid.
Hmm. Well, let's get down to brewing now. Let's start with the grain bill first. Maybe you can talk about that. What kind of grains would you typically use in this beer?
Um, so most Belgian beers have a base of Belgian Pilsner malt.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I'd go to breweries in Belgium, I just like see sacks and sacks and sacks of Dingemans Pils. Um, Pretty common. So I try to use grains from pretty close to wherever these things are from. So I try to use the Belgian maltsters when I can.
Yep.
So sometimes I use the pills, sometimes I use a mix of pills and pale ale, but I add in quite a bit of Munich, and I like.
Is that normal? They use Munich as well?
Yeah, sure. I
Yeah.
mean, Germany's right next to Belgium, and some of these brewers make Munich type malts. So I mean, I'll add in to really pump up the maltiness. I'll use sort of standard Munich, and I'll also use dark Munich, and I'll use some Belgian aromatic malt, which really tends to um, increase the malt aroma and flavor, and just
Yeah,
gives.
I imagine when you get to the aromatic, it probably is adding some of those fruit flavors too when it finishes out, right? A little bit.
Yeah, and it does, but I think of aromatic as kind of a super Munich. So, I mean, it has a lot of that same really rich malt. So, you're using the Pilsner malt because it can give you some attenuation, but it's not really going to carry a lot of the flavors. If you had nothing but Pilsner malt, you'd be kind of making a triple. So, there is a rich malt on the palate, and I like to use some Munich malt that way. Just kind of like if you're doing a Bock type beer.
So what kind of percentages are we looking at here for these different things?
Oh, probably at least 10% each of Munich and Dark Munich, and less than 10% of aromatic. I mean, if I'm doing like a 5-gallon batch, I'll probably have like 2 pounds of each of the Munichs and 1 pound of aromatic, and I might have 10 or 11 pounds of like the other base grains.
Are you and then I assume you're adding candy sugar as well of some kind, right? Probably dark.
Yeah. And this is kind of a change that I've made over the years. When I first started brewing these beers, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, we didn't really have the good candy syrups. We just had these colored rocks, which really didn't carry a whole lot of flavor. So, I mean, I would use them, but I would have like much higher percentages of crystal malts and a lot of different colors and, special B and stuff like that in there. But now you can get, from a couple of different companies, these really dark sugars, and they're candy syrups, actually.
I think Stan talked about this a little bit in the episode a few weeks ago, but it was he was mentioning that the true Belgian candy sugars are caramelized a little bit, and they actually have that's where all the melanoidins come from. Whereas you mentioned a lot of the cheap rock stuff that we were buying years ago was really just almost like brown sugar or something,
Right, and most American brown sugar is just white sugar that's been colored with molasses.
Exactly, which doesn't add this melanoidin, dark caramel flavor we're talking about.
No. And these others are actually sugar syrups. I mean, the color is developed through heating it and the changes that undergo, and it's kind of like if you're making a caramel at home, it's a controlled burning of the sugar, and that
exactly
heat is causing changes, and it brings out a lot of these delicious flavors. So
what percentage of sugar are you using for the malt bill, roughly?
Oh,
I mean, something like this got to be fairly high, I would think, right?
Yeah, I mean, it can be upwards of 20%.
Wow. That's a lot.
So, I mean, in a 5-gallon batch, I might use 2 or 3 pounds of this of different kinds. I'll mix it up. I'll use dark and amber, and if I just need to boost the gravity some, just white sugar.
Mm-hmm. I assume you're adding the sugar in the boil, probably, right?
I tend to add it at the end of the boil.
Yeah.
And stir it up.
So what kind of mash schedule are you using for this style of beer?
Similar to a German kind of step mash. I tend to mash in the mid 140s for the primary conversion. So I might go like 144, 145 for like a half an hour.
Yeah. Fahrenheit, obviously.
60, 62, 63 Celsius.
Right. So I mean, that's at the very low end of the range. And then do you ramp it up after that to try and increase the fermentability? Yeah.
Actually, the lower temperatures will give you the fermentability. The higher temperatures will give you more dextrins. So then I'll crank it up to like 158 or 70C.
Yeah, so but using both those temperatures does give you a very fermentable wort. That's what they use for a lot of lagers, I think, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I said, that's a typical German mash schedule. It's what gives the German lagers their drinkability. They're you taste them and they're malty up front and then they finish dry. Otherwise, if they were just mashed at a single temperature, they would be a lot heavier, and that would really hurt the drinkability of them.
Yep. So that sort of barbell thing where you go with a low temperature and then a high temperature gives you that nice attenuation, higher attenuation.
Well,
right?
there's a couple of different enzymes in play, and you're kind of hitting the sweet spot of two different enzymes,
Maximizing, both the alpha and the beta.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of hops do you use, and what's the hop schedule? I know obviously it's not a hop forward beer, but you need something to balance it out, right?
Yeah, and I tend to use European hops. I'll use Saaz or Styrian Goldings. Those are kind of my two favorite hops to use.
So both noble hops, yeah.
Yeah, and although I'm not sure Styrians are, they're
well, technically they're their own category, but they're closely related. So
yeah, they're definitely continental Europe. So there'll be a bittering charge and then just a light bit towards the end. Maybe a half ounce for 5 gallons of something that'll complement the aromatics. So the Saaz is kind of a spicy kind of hop. So a little bit of that, but you don't want to smell it and say, "Gee, this is a hoppy beer," because you're also going to get you're going to get some aromatics from the alcohol as well.
Right. And then you talked quite a bit about using Belgian yeast, which of course gives you a lot of those esters and complexity that we're looking for. But do you have a particular flavor, particular yeast that you like or style that you like?
Yeah, my favorite in this one is the Y Yeast 3787 Trappist high gravity yeast.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, you need a high gravity yeast here.
It's just kind of the name for it, but it's a really aggressive fermenting yeast. I would caution, if you're going to use this, use a big carboy and have a blow off tube ready, because it's kind of a sticky yeast. So once it starts bubbling, the bubbles don't sort of collapse as fast as some other styles, and that way it's kind of similar to making a Hefeweizen. The foam tends to be very sticky. So
and obviously I was joking, but a high gravity yeast is very important too, because a lot of yeast will top out at 8 or 10%, and you need something that can go higher here, right?
Yeah, you do. And a lot of these Belgian yeasts are somewhat finicky, and I've used this 3787 a lot. And one thing I note about this yeast to be careful of is you don't want to constrain the temperature too much. So I tend to let it kind of free rise and do what it wants to do. If you try to sort of artificially cool it, it just gives up.
Interesting.
You really don't want that to happen. You want it to finish strong, so you get the.
So you leave it pretty much at room temperature and just let it rip, or what?
Yeah. Now's actually not a bad time to be making these beers. The cooler temperatures. So, I usually start at around 64 Fahrenheit, 18C, and then just kind of let it rise, and it might wind up. By the time it's done, it might be up around 70 or 72 Fahrenheit. 20.
Well, that's one of the questions I have. Do you do anything else special in terms of fermentation or aging for this style? Are you doing a diacetyl res? Anything else?
You shouldn't get diacetyl out of any of these yeasts.
Yeah.
Usually the problem is if you do something that causes the yeast to sort of drop out, and then you have to, then all bets are off. you have to kind of warm it back up and rouse it and hope for the best. But that's this one yeast. I mean, there's other yeasts like the 1762. That's the Rochefort yeast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the 3787 is used by both Westmalle and Westfleteren. And it's kind of interesting because that same yeast, the two different breweries use it entirely differently. Westmalle ferments cooler, which is kind of how I go, and the Westfleteren, they drive it a lot warmer, so they get like a kind of a different yeast character. I think the Westfleteren can get more of a ripe banana kind of quality out of it by going hotter. But it's interesting. All the yeasts are going to throw different esters and phenols and in different combinations, and the specific flavors you get will vary quite a bit based on the fermentation temperature. So it's kind of why if you make these kind of beers, I'm a fan of finding a yeast you like and using it a lot, so you learn that yeast, you learn how it responds, you learn how to you learn what's normal for it, you learn what to expect, and you get a better idea if like something's wrong or how you go about fixing it. So my advice is if you find a yeast you like, keep using that for these styles of beer. And just 3787 has always been really reliable for me.
And then, of course, carbonation and packaging. You mentioned most of these beers are bottle conditioned, right?
Yeah, they are. I mean, mine will tend to be in a keg just because I'm lazy and not really entering things in competition anymore. So I'm serving them at home. But the level of carbonation in a lot of these Belgian beers is very high. So it could be a little dangerous, and it's not as high as in the Golden Strongs like the Duvel, but they tend to be fairly high. They're a bubbly beer. So
and then of course you age them for a pretty good long time, I would think, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I'll tend to bulk age mine in a carboy before I put them in a keg, and depending on how old they are, they might attenuate more in the keg and naturally carbonate. Or if I do carbonate in a keg, one thing I usually like to do is just put the gas on pretty low and keep it in a cold place and let it go for like a week or two, and really sort of build up the carbonation gently, just kind of simulating how it would carbonate in a bottle. A lot of the other styles, I do sort of a quick carbonation. I jack it up to like 30 psi and shake the keg, and then leave it for a couple of days. And
old-fashioned quick carb, right?
Yeah, but then you wind up with these big bubbles. And I think one of the enjoyable things about this beer is when you pour it and you get the really tiny bubbles, moose-like head on the beer. It's really enjoyable. So let the beer carbonate gently in bottles, or if you're going to do it in keg, don't do the quick carbonation thing. Let it go slow.
So how long are you aging out a beer like this?
Well, I'll be interested and try it right away, of course. And sometimes, these beers go through cycles. Sometimes when they're really young, you get a lot of these fresh malt flavors, and the sweetness kind of balances the alcohol, but then they attenuate a little bit more and the alcohol gets a little sharp. Then you have to let it sit until the alcohol gets tamed. So I would usually give these things 6 months to a year, before I start trying it, and then I let the beer tell me when it's ready. But like I said, the the best by date on the West Vliet end. I mean, they go 5 years out, and I think Rochefort does the same thing. So they're expecting that 5 years is no problem for these. So
kind of like a good Barolo wine or something like that. You age it 4 or 5 years and then try it.
Yeah. On these West Fleeterans, I often think like 2 to 3 years is pretty good, because sometimes they start falling apart. But the other breweries last longer. I actually had like a Canadian one. It was like Unibrow had one. It was not too long ago. Drummer for Rush, Neil Peart, died. And as a tribute, I pulled out some old vinyl and listened to that, and pulled out a nice Canadian beer. It was a Unibrow Belgian Dark Strong, basically, and it was a good 10 years old, and it was delicious.
So how can? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So these beers can really kind of hold up for a while. It's depends on how much room in your cellar you have and how much patience you have, but they're good winter beer. So it's nice to if you've got some laid down, bring it out when it's cold weather and check it out.
Well, how do you know if you've made the perfect Belgian Dark Strong here?
Well, you have a couple glasses, and then if you stand up and find your knees don't work, that's a pretty good sign.
And you're in the ballpark, yeah.
Yeah. These, I think I put in the style guidelines that these things are like sneaky or dangerous or something like that. I mean, if you do it well, you're just sitting there, you're just enjoying all the different flavors. Every time you sip, you're tasting something different. And then you don't even realize you're getting hammered until you go to stand up in a little bit, and then you're like, whoa, there it is. So you have to give these beers some respect.
Nice. Well, do you have any closing thoughts on creating the perfect Belgian Dark Strong ale?
I think we've gone over pretty much all of my tips. Take your time with this one. Like a lot of beers, you don't want the last bottle you try to be the best one. Try to understand where the beer peaks, so that you actually can enjoy it when it's in its prime. And if you're interested in looking up a book or something, I mean, the Michael Jackson books are really good, but I came across no relation, but here's a book.
So the title is Belgian Trappist and Abbey Ales by Jeff Vandemsteen. I think, is that right? I'm trying to read it off the video there.
Right. And it's kind of
it looks like it's a good 400 or 500 pages there. Yeah,
it's pretty hefty, but it seemed pretty well researched, and it's kind of talking more about the monasteries and how the beers were developed. But it's an interesting read.
I'll try and put that in the show notes if I can.
Yeah, I mean, I like going off and going to different sources than everybody else is looking at to see, especially if it's something like that is from somebody from over there. See what they had to say about it.
Nice. Well, Gordon, really appreciate you coming on the show. Do you want to say anything else about your BYO event coming up? I know you got a couple sessions there. Maybe just give one last plug.
Yeah. It's late March, and it's in Denver. It's down near where they hold the JABF.
You and I will be there.
Yeah, we'll be there with Blickman and
Palmer,
John Palmer, and Chris White, and it's a nice event, because what I like about this is that they're all day, in depth, small class. The classes are capped at 30 35 people. So it's a small room, and the stuff I'm doing is hands-on. So I've got some slides, and I'll talk about things, but then like we'll go over to the brewing system, and we'll go through them, and I'll show you. When I said, okay, it needs to look like this, I'll point to it and say, now look at it and smell it and touch it, and learn that. And
that is a fun event. Yeah,
the discussions are great. They really are. A whole lot of fun there. So
the 2 sessions you're teaching are
advanced all grain brewing. For home brewers, and like I said, I'll be using a Blickman electric system, and it's just the same kind of system that I use at home. So I liked it so much, I went out and got it. So
yeah, you have one of them, I know.
Yeah,
it's a 3-tier system, I think, right?
Yeah, well, it's three vessel, but it's all it's all in line.
Yeah,
but. Yeah, I like it this time of year when it's cold, because I can brew in the garage and not have to go outside.
Yeah, and I'm going to be teaching courses on brewing a recipe design. I'm doing a sort of an intermediate essentials one, and then a advanced one as well. So should be a great time. Looking forward to it.
You still do the sensory stuff as part of that?
Yeah, we'll be doing sensory. We'll be doing a lot of tasting. Go through. I spend a lot of time on ingredients, because it's just flavors from ingredients are so important, as well as techniques, water, everything. We'll be covering a little bit of everything. Should be fun, though. I'm looking forward to it. People can still sign up. It's the end of. Go to the look for Brew Your Own Boot Camp, or BYO Boot Camp. If you Google that, you can find it. Of course, be in the show notes as well.
And I think they may still have a discount if the people hurry.
Yeah, they had one open this week anyways. I don't know if it's still open now, but it's still a great event. Look forward to it.
Yeah, a whole lot of fun.
Well, Gordon, thank you again for coming on the show. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, you gave me a good excuse to go dig a bottle of West Fleetern out of the cellar, and
like you need an excuse.
Yeah, but now I can taunt you with it.
Yeah, I wish I had one here. I agree. So my guest today was Mr. Gordon Strong. He's president of the Beer Judge Certification Program and author of the books Modern Homebrew Recipes and Brewing Better Beer. Thanks again, Gordon.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
A big thank you to Gordon Strong for joining me this week. Thanks also to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They're currently offering 20% off their all-access subscription pass with access to videos, brewing courses, exclusive articles, and the amazing Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Go to beerandbrewing.com/BeerSmith to get your all-access pass today. Again, that's beerandbrewing.com/BeerSmith. And also the Brew Easy. Brew big in small spaces with the best all-grain, ultra-compact system available. The Brew Easy's revolutionary setup includes batch sparge efficiency, brew-in-a-bag simplicity, and the wort clarification of a rim system. It's easy to set up, easy to operate, and easy on the eyes. Electric and propane models are available, and it's the system that I personally brew on. Visit BlickmanEngineering.com for more information. Again, that's BlickmanEngineering.com. And BeerSmith 3 is available on both desktop and mobile platforms. BeerSmith 3 adds mead, wine, and cider support, new Whirlpool hop options, support for high-altitude beer brewing, and a whole lot more. Check out BeerSmith 3 and get your free 21-day trial today from BeerSmith.com. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a great brewing week.